Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome to the special focus. I am Zahid Jadwat and we are together until 8 p.m. tonight right here on Salam Media, of course via our live stream on salammedia.com/listen-live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page, as well as live on our Twitter handle. Thank you so much for tuning in from wherever you are tuning in. We do hope that you enjoy the show and you can reach out to us. The WhatsApp number is 0617660355. You can get in touch with us via that WhatsApp number. Of course, you can also tweet and tag your comments at Salam Media, and don't forget to use the hashtag the special focus. Now, South Africa is experiencing an influx of cases of police brutality. More than 5,500 cases of police criminal offences are reported every year. Of these numbers, more than 3,500 cases of torture and assault perpetrated by police were reported. This equates to more than 60% of reported cases of police brutality, with an average of 65% for the period between 2014 and 2018. This means that after 24 years into democracy, South Africa might still be struggling to police in a democratic manner. Now, this issue of police brutality was brought to the fore once again after it was alleged that an unarmed teenager, Nathaniel Julius, was shot dead by police outside his home in Eldorado Park last week. He was allegedly killed by a police officer after struggling to communicate and answer questions due to his Down syndrome disability. This incident has sparked outrage, and tonight we are now going to try and find out what exactly is happening with our policing in South Africa and what exactly does this brutality mean, how serious is this issue, and what can we actually do about it. So let me introduce you to our guests for this evening. Firstly, we have Mr. David Bruce, who is an independent researcher in policing, crime and criminal justice. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Hi.
We also have Ms. Thato Masiangoako, who is a researcher at the Socio-Economic Rights Institute. That's SERI. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we are joined by Mr. Themba Masuku, who is the program manager at the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as well, Mr. Okay, it seems we have not been joined yet by Mr. Themba Masuku. He should join us in a few moments. But let me also introduce you to our other guest for tonight. We have Ms. Ziyanda Stuurman, independent researcher in policing and security. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so David, let's get straight to you to begin with. So what exactly is police brutality, and what does it mean when we speak about police brutality in the South African context?
Right, well, in my work, I've always just followed the simple approach that police brutality is unlawful or unnecessary, the unnecessary use of force by the police. So one has police, the most visible and prominent examples of police brutality are usually cases in which people are killed, such as happened last week with Nathaniel Julius. But you also have incidents which take place in the context, for instance, of public order policing operations. But the most prevalent forms of police brutality are actually what you could call non-lethal uses of force. So situations where people are assaulted by the police and where there isn't a legal justification for doing so. What it tells us, well, one thing that people say about police brutality is that police brutality tends to be a problem in societies which have first-class and second-class citizens. So if you're looking at the situation in the US, the fact that Black Americans are exposed to so much police violence is a reflection of the fact that there's in many ways a kind of hierarchy in American society, in a type of racial hierarchy. And similarly in South Africa, we can say that the continuation of police brutality in South Africa is in part a reflection of the fact that we continue to be a nation of first-class and second-class citizens.
So just to simplify it for the average person, it would basically mean that police brutality would mean the unnecessary use of force against citizens. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so statistics indicate that police brutality may be up to 3 times worse in South Africa than it is in the United States, based on the fact that the South African police service is said to have killed 3 times more people per capita than police in the United States do. Now, I wouldn't want to undermine the ongoing movement against police brutality in that country, but it seems as though this is a much bigger problem in South Africa than we actually thought it was, Ziyanda.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about the movement against police brutality in the US, and particularly Black Lives Matter, and bringing attention to that issue. I think that there's far less of an understanding in South Africa of just how structural police brutality is and police violence is, and that it goes back to something that David was speaking about in terms of there being first and second class citizens. And much of police violence and police brutality really is sort of meted out against poor South Africans, South Africans who live in areas and communities that are isolated. And so those are not necessarily what you would kind of term perfect victims, in the sense that that their suffering is highlighted by the media. And so we kind of think of police brutality and violence as being far more kind of once-off or fairly random, whereas it is very much structural and systemic.
Yeah, so I just want to find out now, why is it that these certain actions by police seem to be something not many people are aware of? Why is it that now all of a sudden we seem to be finding out about this? And of course, the outrage, of course, justifiable. But why all of a sudden now? Why are we just finding out about it now? Or did we know all along, but we perhaps weren't aware enough about the situation that's actually happening? Ziyanda?
I think social media is certainly a big part of it. I think a lot more people are capturing what's happening, through their phones and sort of mobilizing. But like I mentioned earlier, I think, a lot of the victims of police brutality and of police violence are those who are in poorer communities. The vast majority are poor Black and colored South Africans who then, don't have access to media in the same way that someone who's elite or who's suburban may have. And so their cases are not necessarily covered in the same way as more prominent or affluent victims of violence are.
Yeah. Now, Thato, over to you now. We are aware that police brutality is not a strange occurrence here in South Africa. It's not something new. It was ongoing during the apartheid era as well. So what might be some of the reasons why police brutality still persists, and why does it exist in the post-apartheid democracy? Shouldn't our policing system have changed by now, that we could have eradicated police brutality? Thato?
Yeah, thank you, Zahid. I think the reason why we are dealing with police brutality in a post-apartheid or constitutional democratic framework is precisely because of the fact that we have failed to sufficiently and meaningfully transform the police that we inherited from apartheid. And that was a police force that was inherently brutal towards Black and brown people in this country. And I think specific to the post-94 moment, what we see is poor leadership within the police. We see leadership that uses very inflammatory rhetoric around policing. And that has been coupled with a very tough on crime approach, which really encourages excessive uses of force in order to combat crime. But that often spills over into how people who are not necessarily criminals are treated. I think a big part of this problem is poor accountability. The fact that our records of holding police officers accountable is so low. On average, about a little over 1.5% of police officers are held accountable or see criminal conviction. This contributes to a culture of impunity, if you will. And I think this is also related to a wider structure in which the police have been tasked under this framework to form the interface between communities and local governments. So when communities and groups who have long-standing grievances need to express this in the form of protest, they are not met by the bodies to which they have issues with. So local government, for example, a university is another example, or business is another example. Those are not the people they're confronted with when they want to express their grievances. It's the police that form the interface between communities, groups, and the objects of protest, essentially. And so I think that has, I think, fostered a culture within the police that sees protest as criminal and responds in an especially violent fashion.
Yeah, and I see we've just been joined by Mr. Themba Masuku as well on the show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Mr. Themba.
Thank you.
All right. So we were speaking about police brutality in South Africa and why this might exist. And as Ms. Thato was speaking just now, just before this, she says that accountability is really lacking when it comes to police brutality. She says that only about 1.5% of police officers who are alleged to have committed such crimes are actually held accountable. So, Themba, do you think this might be the reason, this might be contributing to the high level of police brutality in South Africa?
Absolutely, Thato is spot on in terms of what is driving police brutality. But just to add on to what she says, I think one has to also understand police brutality within the context of violence in South Africa. We come from a very violent past. Most of our lives were defined by violence. Violence was entrenched in many aspects of our life, and it was not only isolated to the police. I mean, our democracy itself is a product of violence struggle. So the issue of use of violence, it's embedded in our systems, in our culture. The state itself, it's very violent. Both in terms of how it deals with many issues, social, economic issues. Policies are very unfriendly to people that are marginalized and poor. So there's a historic kind of link that we come from. So the issue of why we, in post-democracy, why we still experience issues of violence, it's exactly what Thato is talking about. There is almost like a culture of impunity that does not recognize that the use of violence is actually a criminal offense when it is used recklessly. If you look, for example, if you look at Marikana as a defining moment in our democracy, and the lack of accountability, when the kind of numbers of people were killed, it's incredible, because then it begins to raise a number of critical questions around respect for the law, respect for life, human rights culture within our policing system. That there is a problem there. One would have thought a period like Marikana would have been a defining moment in our democracy, in that the numbers of people, the sheer numbers of people that were killed by police officers would have demonstrated in a much more pointed way the importance of both internal accountability mechanism, but also external accountability mechanism. The challenge here is that there's often internally problems with holding police accountable, and cases that involve police brutality are deferred to IPID, and IPID is overwhelmed by cases, and in most cases it is not able to deliver on its mandate. I mean, IPID is not delivered on cases involving Marikana, for example, which raises a concern around the willingness of police system or management to deal with the problems in their environment.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting observation there, Themba Masuku, from who is the program manager of the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. So, David, do you agree with this observation that's just been made by Mr. Themba Masuku, that perhaps this stems from a culture of violence in South Africa that might possibly be embedded within the South African culture?
Yes, I do agree with Themba. I completely agree with him that one needs to understand police violence in the context of the broader problem of violence in South Africa. At the same time, I don't think that one should treat broader societal violence as an excuse for police violence. Can be seen as a contributing factor, but the state bears a responsibility to ensure that police and other people who work for it adhere to and uphold the Constitution. And so, the principles of the Constitution include some of the issues that, for instance, Themba referred to, such as questions of respect for life. And I don't think that so I think it certainly is shaped by the broader culture of violence in South Africa. In many ways, one can see the police as being part of the problem of the culture of violence. And I would say, particularly, I think, above all, it seems to be that in KwaZulu-Natal, there's a very profound problem of police involvement in violence, and perhaps this association between this kind of culture of violence and the police is most strongly affects the police in that province. But the police then should represent a departure from, even if there is a problem in South African society of violence, the police should aim to set a higher standard than the standards, of South African society. And so, I think that there is possibility, there is the scope for policing in South Africa to be conducted in a way which isn't characterized by brutality, if there is the commitment on a political level to doing so.
Indeed. And for the listeners who have just joined us, we are discussing police brutality in South Africa. This, of course, after 16-year-old Nathaniel Julius was killed allegedly by police officers outside his Eldorado Park home in Johannesburg. So if you would like to join this discussion, remember that you can send us a comment on WhatsApp. The number to do that is 061 766 0355. And of course, you can tweet and tag @SalamMedia. Don't forget to use the hashtag the special focus. And you can actually leave a comment below if you are watching live on YouTube and on our Facebook page as well. So please don't hesitate to drop your comment. We will actually read some of your comments in a few moments' time. But now, just speaking about some of the cases of police brutality which have made it into the news and into this national spotlight. So a few months back during the lockdown, there was the case where Collins Koza, who was murdered in Alexandria during the lockdown by the South African National Defence Force, and now Nathaniel Julius allegedly murdered in Eldorado Park by the South African Police Services. Now, if we look at these two cases, something that we notice in common with both cases is that these individuals hail from historically disadvantaged areas in our country. These areas are ravaged by poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So, thus goes a certain narrative that in South Africa, if you are poor, you are treated brutally by law enforcement authorities. So, is there perhaps any truth to this narrative? And what does it tell us about the victims of police brutality, Ziyanda?
I think that's certainly true. I think oftentimes those who experience police brutality are those who are from marginalized groups, and like you mentioned, disadvantaged communities. And these groups also include sex workers. These groups also include people living in informal settlements, those who are experiencing homelessness, and very often as well, women are harassed and harmed by police too. This really speaks to, again, to go back to a very good point that David made right at the beginning of this conversation, that policing, and particularly policing that's violent, really the sharp end of it is experienced by those marginalized groups and those communities where and countries where, and societies, I guess, where there exists two classes of citizens. Another good example of this, besides the United States, is also Brazil, which is another country that really struggles with racial inequality, poverty, and other societal issues. So I think we're going to continue seeing this issue because of how unequal our society is. And that's not to say that inequality would solve police violence and brutality, but certainly that certain communities will experience it much more than others.
Ms. Thato, you might want to respond to that just quickly before we take an ad break.
I think Ziyanda is absolutely right. I mean, another country that I would think of is India. I mean, an example of when they instituted the lockdown, the treatment of poor and rural Indians was especially shocking. And I think in this country, the attention that is given to cases that affect poor and marginalized community do not receive the necessary attention that they deserve. I think Ziyanda is absolutely correct. And I think it's also important to note that on the part of the police, there is a clear indication, at least from their part, and I'm speaking from my own opinion, honestly, whom they treat and how they treat them has a lot to do with whom they think has access to legal resources, has the resources and time to follow through with the case. So if you lodge a case with IPID, or if you even try to institute civil proceedings, those are very time-consuming and very expensive endeavors. And usually, poor and marginalized communities simply do not have the capacity to follow through with a case seeking justice for their families for years and years on end. So I think she's absolutely right, and I think that stems to it boils down to whose lives matter essentially and whose do not.
Yeah. Okay. So 29 minutes past 7 Central African time. I think we should take a quick ad break now. And when we get back, I do want to hear from the listeners as well. Remember, you can send us your comments on WhatsApp via the number 061-766-0355. And you can leave your comment below on our Facebook and YouTube live videos. Let's take an ad break. And when we get back, we will get to these comments. Please do stay tuned.
Hussein and Company are renowned for their quality Islamic wear and goods. IG Hussein and Company stock a variety of Islamic items, musallas, kitabs, Medina dates, perfumes and exclusive gifts. We guarantee you a unique and friendly shopping experience for the entire family. Visit our new branch in Overport at 202 Kenilworth Park, Brickfield Road. Open 7 days a week with ample parking and wheelchair friendly. Like us on Facebook or Instagram at IG Hussein for our latest promotions and updates. IG Hussein and Company, your Islamic lifestyle.
Dad, Well, I've been chatting with an investment broker today, and...
Broker? Did the broker tell you that our economy is a mess? There's bushfires in Australia, America wanted World War III, and now the coronavirus is traveling around the world.
Well, I also thought about purchasing some crypto.
Crypto? What's that, like another pyramid scheme? I don't trust what I can't see.
There's an apartment in Belito.
So all your family will be asking to stay there for free. And what if the government takes it away, eh?
Dad, I don't think it works like that.
I'll tell you what works. Gold. At your age, I invested in gold coins and it paid for your university fees and your wedding. No contracts, no agreements. Your investment is in your hands and you own it. With a 70% growth in only 5 years, do you still doubt gold investment? Contact RJ Coin today, 031 202 4701, or visit them at 151 Stephen Lamini Road in Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Would you like to give Sadaka 365 days a year? You can with the Al Imdad Foundation's Daily Sadaka program. Donate as little as R1 a day for a month for each member of your family, up to any specified amount, and receive monthly feedback on where your contributions have made a difference. Visit alimdad.com and download your Daily Sadaka debit order form or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. You are tuned into Salam Media. This is the special focus, and my name is Zahid. Jadwat. I will be keeping you company right up until 8 p.m. this evening, just as I will do every Wednesday evening. So let me just remind you our guests this evening. Firstly, we have David Bruce, who is an independent researcher in policing, crime, and criminal justice. Then we have Thato Masiangoako, researcher at the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, SERI. We also have Themba Masuku, program manager at the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, that's the APCOF. We also have Ziyanda Stuurman, who is an independent researcher in policing and security. Thank you so much to all of you for tuning in, and thanks to the panelists as well for joining us. So let me just see some of the comments which have come through on WhatsApp. So firstly, we have a question from Anonymous. This question says, why is it that a lot of police don't land behind bars for their actions? Is Police Minister Bekele protecting the police? I think that's one of the issues we dealt with just before the ad break, when we were speaking about the lack of accountability and how this might be driving police brutality. Of course, if one of the panelists want to pick up on that, they may certainly do so. But just one more comment from Mohammed in Durban here. He says, why is the ANC standing in solidarity with Floyd when they won't do anything about their own people here in South Africa? And I think that comment relates to the protests in the United States against police brutality after George Floyd had died due to heavy-handedness by the police. So that's an interesting question, Ziyanda. Speaking about the response here in South Africa, when the protests erupted in the United States relating to the death of George Floyd, of course there was quite a bit of outrage here in South Africa as well. And unfortunately, it seems as though not so much energy being dedicated to police brutality here in South Africa for our own people right here in South Africa. Ziyanda?
I mean, I would disagree with that. I think that there are plenty of civil society and NGO groups that have been working on issues of police brutality and on ending systemic police violence. Off the top of my head, I can think of the Sex Workers Education or SWET advocacy team. There's Abahlali Basamjondolo. there's the Social Justice Coalition, there's Lawyers for Human Rights. I think there are plenty of organizations who have worked particularly hard at advocating for holding police officers accountable and for trying to end violent practices that police often use during service delivery protests, for example, which is a major or which are major incidents of police violence. I think just because our activism doesn't look the same as it does in the US doesn't mean that people care less. I think that there's a lot of work being done by a lot of communities and a lot of groups who we don't necessarily see and who don't receive the same amount of attention as Black Lives Matter. But I would certainly say that there are just as many people who care about ending police brutality and violence in South Africa than there are in the US.
Yeah. So, Mr. Themba, now just to continue with the discussion from where we left off before the ad break, we were speaking about some of the factors that might be influencing police brutality in South Africa. So do you think it's plausible to suggest that perhaps the police brutality in the apartheid era, this might just be a legacy of exactly what had happened under apartheid?
Yes, before I answer that question, I just want to zoom into the question that you asked, Ziyanda. Maybe it differs slightly. I think the concern for me is not that there are no organizations. Civil society is really quite active in confronting the police brutality. The examples that Ziyanda gave are very useful. But the concern for me is, after a massacre of 44 people in Marikana, we don't see the kind of reform that follows after the murder of George Floyd, for example, or the murder of people in whether it's Lawrence in the UK or so there's something inherently that is a problem. In our political system, that we have not seen the kind of changes that one would have expected to follow after Marikana. Marikana was a huge period in our democracy, but it has not shaken the policing system in this country. In fact, the policing system has remained the same. So even after so many cases, we can mention a variety of them. We can mention Mido. We can mention Andres Tatane. There've been many incidents that would have been very critical in ensuring that there's far-reaching reforms in the policing system, but we are yet to see those kind of reforms taking place. But to answer to your question, there are just two things that I want to mention that for me remain quite a challenge. And I agree with David that we're not going to use apartheid as a scapegoating. This is a new area, a new dispensation, and we are required to start challenging some of the practices that took place during the apartheid system, and the issue of violence and brutality is one of those challenges that this country continues to face. But in the police system, there are just two things that just worry me. One has to do with the enforcement, for example, of the code of conduct. The code of conduct in the SAPS is supposed to be such a fundamental, transformative document that basically sets a new bar, a new standard for how a professional police officer should conduct themselves. But the enforcement of that remains a challenge. The reason why very few parents would say to their children, whenever you are in doubt or whenever you are in problems, contact the police officer, is because there's a huge trust deficit. Partly because the issue of how police officers conduct themselves is not enforced through the code of conduct. There's a lot of, we've already spoken about challenges around internal accountability system through enforcing a disciplinary system. That is not happening to the extent to which it should be happening, because a lot of police officers that are complicit in cases of brutality, they are still at work. But the second issue is just the disregard to the issue of human rights. Just the disregard to the issue of human rights and dignity. It's so apparent in the manner in which citizens are treated by police. The COVID, this period of lockdown, I would say it severely exposed a lot of problems in the policing system, in the manner in which ordinary South Africans who found themselves in the wrong side of regulations were treated by the police. So there's a particular culture that is worrying, that perpetuates this violence completely in many instances. The use of force is completely unrestrained and completely unnecessary. I mean, like my colleagues have already alluded to, and the most victims are poor and marginalized people in communities, your sex workers, your people that are in the margins of society, are the people that seem to receive the biggest brunt when it comes to police brutality. So it's a culture that needs to be nipped in the bud, because it is a problem. It is supposed to be dealt with through leadership, through code of conduct, through command and control, and these areas are areas of real concern. That you've got police leadership that is unwilling to enforce their own instruments, their own code of conduct, their own disciplinary systems and measures to hold police officers who are deviating from them accountable. It's a cause for concern.
And if I could just pick up on one of the points you mentioned regarding the implementation of reforms in the policing sector in South Africa. David, if you could just pick up on that. Of course, Themba having mentioned that Marikana massacre was a huge moment in the history of South Africa. Of course, it was the most violent use again, the most brutal police force against protesters since, I think, the Sharpeville massacre in the apartheid era. Why do you think there hasn't been much reform within the police system 24 years into democracy now, David?
Well, there's a couple of things I would say. I think there has been unwillingness to really engage with and understand what happened at Marikana. And so, part of the issue, if people are comparing Marikana with the George Floyd incident, I think it's very clear to people what happened in the George Floyd incident, and so but in the case of Marikana, we're talking about an incident which is in many ways quite complex. The killings on the 16th of August 2012 took place at two different places. And the perceptions of many members of the public about what happened are influenced very strongly by television coverage of the incident. So in many ways, there's a limited understanding of what really happened at Marikana. And, if we're talking about to what degree the police were involved in what can be regarded as an atrocity, we would need to understand much more about what happened there and who is really responsible for what did happen. Beyond that, I think also there's often a political dimension to these things. So in certain situations, it is almost expedient for the police to and for political leadership to ensure that people are held accountable. So if one thinks about the Mido Marcia case or the case of Nathaniel Julius last week, it would seem that in these circumstances, there is some almost there's a kind of political approval or the process of accountability of ensuring that police are held accountable for these actions is given some kind of blessing at a senior level, whether that's within the police or by, for instance, the Minister of Police. But in these other cases, if I'm talking about Marikana, for instance, or the Andries Tatana case, and you know, there are other cases which come to mind, there seems to be a type of political resistance to holding people accountable, and it seems that is often a factor which can make quite a critical difference to whether people are held accountable or not.
And Thato, you know, just speaking about public trust in the police, so how exactly does police brutality affect public trust in the South African police services? Thato?
Thank you. So I think, you know, as I said earlier, police are firstly tasked to serve and protect. But in the context of protest, they form that interface between local government structures and communities. And I think what happens is when you see repeated forms of violence, first and foremost, there's an immediate cost, I think, that is borne by victims of violence and communities and groups that experience that kind of violence. But from the police's perspective, they arrive at a situation often insufficiently equipped, insufficiently trained, but also armed with a mentality that views protest action or particular groups as problematic or criminal. Or illegitimate in some ways. And so they respond in an excessively violent manner. And when that violence kind of ensues and escalates, and the police fail to de-escalate violence, when the police fail to hold the line and uphold their duties in those incidences, violence escalates, and the impact on communities and groups is a harm that is both physical and psychological through injuries that are sustained from the harm that's caused by police actions that often goes unaccounted for, as well as the loss of life. And that is a heavy cost and trauma that is borne by communities. But when that continues and communities are met with excessive forms of violence, I think that has a hardening effect on communities and groups. And so what you'll find is very often a protest that starts off as peaceful but is met with excessively violent policing will often disintegrate into violence. And that just feeds a virtuous cycle that sort of doesn't end. And then communities learn from that. Communities learn from those experiences. But perhaps most importantly, I think the harm that is caused by that is the lack of trust in police and other governmental bodies. And that has a corrosive effect on legitimacy. And it also has, I think, a corrosive effect on police effectiveness. I think the sheer human cost in suffering, you know, you can never really calculate that. But in terms of how much we pay, the police ministry, according to the Institute for Security Studies, just in the 2017-2018 financial year, if I'm not wrong, or 2018-2019, police paid out 535 million rand in civil damages against victims of police violence. So I think going back to what Themba mentioned, I think is a broken police accountability framework where accountability fails internally, it fails externally, and from members of the public, that continues to corrode the legitimacy and trust in the police. And I think that extends to how the state is viewed more broadly.
All right, 10 minutes to 8 p.m. Central African time. We are discussing police brutality in South Africa. Of course, this is the special focus on Salam Media. My name is Zahid, and we are nearing the end of the show. So just quickly before we begin to wrap up, Ziyanda, you wrote in an article that was published by the Mail and Guardian that the agency charged with the responsibility to investigate incidents of police brutality, that of course is IPID, is, quote, critically underfunded, understaffed, and it reports to the political head of the South African Police Services. These factors make the process of achieving justice for victims of police violence endlessly difficult, if not impossible. This needs to change, and citizens need to demand this change. So what sort of change are you calling for, Ziyanda?
Well, I think there's, first of all, just starting off with funding IPID. What I've definitely noticed in my research and writing on this is that IPID has become systematically underfunded as the years have progressed. And so that's made their work and their staffing incredibly difficult. I think that this is something that citizens should speak up and out against, and demand that IPID is properly funded and therefore enabled to be able to do its work. In some provinces, there are as few as 2 IPID investigators who are working on really thousands of cases or hundreds of cases at a time. And you know, this then reduces the possibility for families and for victims and for their families to achieve justice. This is something that Thato was speaking about, which he said that those processes are really difficult. It's very difficult to access legal assistance, and those cases can drag on for a really long time. And it really does start with the fact that IPID itself is really hampered in many ways. So this is about calling on government, and you know, whether that's through civil society, whether it's through submissions in Parliament or in other ways. That's certainly something that we should be looking and focusing energy and attention on.
All right, so I think we should begin wrapping up with this segment of the show, of course, speaking about police brutality. And after 8 p.m., of course, we will be continuing with a short special broadcast. We have a segment speaking about a march that is expected to take place against police brutality. We'll be speaking to one of the organizers. His name is Keith Jadwat, but he'll be joining us telephonically after 8 p.m. So just to begin wrapping up this discussion with our panelists for the main conversation this evening, David, you might want to begin wrapping up your final thoughts on this discussion, and then we can move on to Themba Masuku. You can give us your final thoughts. Thato Masiangoako, your final thoughts, and then Ziyanda, you can give us your final thoughts.
Okay, well, maybe I think would like to thank my fellow panel members. I think we've generally reflected the fact that there's a lot of common ground between us, and yeah, so it's been a pleasure to be with all of you here. Just one thing that I would say is perhaps something that hasn't been given sufficient emphasis is people have talked about the internal mechanisms of accountability, but in my view, the most serious failure in terms of the issue of accountability is in terms of this kind of issue of internal accountability, and so we need to interrogate that issue in a lot more detail, and we need to move towards a situation where police understand and assume and accept that if they use force, they need to answer and account for any situation in which they do so.
Okay, thank you so much for your input, Mr. David Bruce. Your final thoughts, how we might be able to fix this situation, Themba?
Yes, I think the one area also that we have not really focused on in this debate is just around the use of force legislation. We can see that there are a lot of attempts to transform the use of force using kind of policies and instructions. But my argument is that if you're going to make a very far-reaching kind of reform, around the use of force, then you need to interrogate the legislation itself. The use of force legislation is very unhelpful, in the sense that it lies in many legislations. There is no one legislation that deals with the use of force. You'll find it in Criminal Procedure Act. You'll find it in Correctional Services Act. You'll find it in many areas. That needs to be reformed. We need one legislation that deals with the use of force. But perhaps also the other issue, I think Thato reflects on that, around trust issues. Part of it is that without trust, community trust, it's the reason why we see problems like vigilantism emerging, because people do not use. If people don't have trust on the police, they are unlikely that they're going to bring their problem to the people that they've got a problem with. So what do? They solve the problem themselves. That creates a problem, chaos. Rule of law and many other rights are infringed when people are unable to trust the system that is designed for them to use. So it's very important that police and work very hard to gain community trust and confidence, so that people can use the system that are there, designed for them to use, as opposed to creating parallel structures to those that are been set up. Otherwise, thank you very much for having us. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your input. Thato, your final thoughts. Perhaps you might want to pick up on what Mr. Themba Masuku was speaking about, legislation against police brutality. Do you think that's the way forward?
I definitely think that is the way forward. But I think, just like David and Themba, I'd like to thank my panelists and thank you, the organizers, for having us. I think I would like to close by probably emphasizing two things. I think the first is leadership. And I think, especially during this lockdown, what we've seen is lacking leadership. And I think even that the ruling party and our president launched an anti-racism campaign about 2.5 months into the lockdown. And we had our president say absolutely nothing about the deaths that were occurring during the lockdown, I think speaks to a profound lack of leadership, particularly when it comes to police violence and police brutality. We had a minister of police that went as far as to deny the fact that there's even a police brutality issue in this country. And that is something that is profoundly dangerous. It is harmful. It has an impact on even the lowest ranking officers who are tasked with upholding the law and serving and protecting. But when they feel emboldened by a minister of police that in different ways encourages excessive uses of force, that is incredibly damaging. And so leadership, I think, has been lacking. And we need the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee to step up and play a much bigger role in holding the police accountable. They need to ask the hard questions. We need the institutions that are important for the external accountability framework to also be bolstered. That includes IPID, that includes the NPA. But I definitely agree with David. We need a police force that internally inculcates a culture of respect for human dignity and human rights. In the Khoza matter, Judge Fabricius had to, what he says in his judgment is that, the case was strange because he was simply being asked to restate the law. The fact that the police were treating people in a manner that was completely in conflict with what is in our constitution and with what is in conflict with their own codes of conduct, I think speaks to the deficit within the police force around around human rights. That is something that I think needs a lot of work. And again, accountability is absolutely critical. Police officers are not going to change the way that they treat members of the public if they do not believe that they'll be held accountable for that. So I absolutely agree with all of my panelists in that regard.
All right, thank you so much for that as well. Ziyanda, just as brief as possible, because I see it's already 8 p.m. We had actually, I thought this would end much earlier, but unfortunately, but as it seems, we have much more to discuss. We haven't even gotten deep enough. So just quickly, your final thoughts, Ziyanda?
My final thoughts is just to pick up on a thread that Thato mentioned right at the beginning of her final thoughts. This really all hinges on leadership. I think if we don't have a police commissioner, a minister of police, provincial commissioners, and even at the station level, leaders who really, start to hold their own officers accountable and really stop protecting violent officers, I think this is something that we're going to see much more of. And until we drill down to that issue of police leadership, really trying to push out a message of being tough on crime, and war on crime, and these very violent analogies of police work, then I think this will be an issue that will continue for a long time. We really need to choose better police and political leadership.
All right, thank you so much for that as well. So I think from this discussion, what we can deduce is that the police brutality issue in South Africa is a serious issue. It needs to be dealt with. And I think the contributing factors to this issue, as we've mentioned throughout this discussion, is leadership, the lack of accountability within police structures, of course, the backdrop of violence in South Africa in general, the culture of violence that we have in South Africa, and of course also inequality. That's one of the major issues in South Africa, and perhaps this might just also be driving the police brutality situation. And of course, understaffing and under-resourced independent police investigative directorate. That's also one of the issues. But unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it for tonight. We are going to take a quick ad break, but when we get back, we will be speaking to one of the organizers of a march against police brutality. But for now, thank you so much for your time, Mr. David Bruce, independent researcher in policing, crime and criminal justice, Ms. Thato Masiangoako, researcher at the Socio-Economic Rights Institute, Mr. Themba Masuku, program manager at the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, and finally, Ms. Ziyanda Stuurman, independent researcher in policing and security. Thank you so much for your time. All right, we'll take a quick ad break now, and I will be back just after the ad break to speak about a march against police brutality. Do stay tuned.
Nature's Blends Black Seed, Kalonji, Sunnah and Hadith Benefit Remedy. Nature's Blends has a variety of natural products to help you take control of your life. Key ingredients being black seed oil, cod liver oil, glucosamine, turmeric, black seed, and Yemeni cedar honey. Add this to your favorite foods or mix with cedar honey to improve health. Black seed has a lot of benefits. Just to mention a few, it's antibacterial, anti-ulcer, anti-inflammatory, and pain-killing, etc. For more information or to order, contact Shakir Kassem on 082 777 8696 or email shakir222@icloud.com or follow at Shakir_ABC on Instagram for all your Sunnah remedy needs. Nature's Blends, bringing nature's finest.
Osman's Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been perfecting the art of the perfect blend of spices, pure, aromatic, and well-seasoned. Spices to tantalize your taste buds. From creative cuisines to gastronomical gourmet goodies. From exotic odors to traditional dishes, Osman's Taj Mahal have remained synonymous with quality spices and condiments. Taj Mahal rice, beans, and lentils. Try our range of chili bite mixes, rose and ilachi syrup, our quick and easy biryani pack, and our traditional range of spice blends. Osman's Taj Mahal. There is no substitute for quality.
The world watched in collective horror as the massive explosion ripped through Beirut, a vibrant city now covered in dust. Beirut is bleeding. We at Islamic Relief are on the ground helping the Lebanese people pick up the pieces. We need food, We need water, and we need emergency aid for hundreds and thousands of the victims. You can help. You can make a difference. You can save a life. Donate now to the Islamic Relief Lebanon Emergency Appeal. Visit islamicrelief.org.za. Call 0800 111 898 and donate now.
Dad, well, I've been chatting with an investment broker today and...
Broker? Did the broker tell you that our economy is a mess? There's bushfires in Australia, America wanted World War III, and now the coronavirus is traveling around the world.
Well, I also thought about purchasing some crypto.
Crypto? What's that, like another pyramid scheme? I don't trust what I can't see.
There's an apartment in Belito.
So all your family will be asking to stay there for free. And what if the government takes it away, eh?
Dad, I don't think it works like that.
I'll tell you what works. Gold. At your age, I invested in gold coins and it paid for your university fees and your wedding. No contracts, no agreements. Your investment is in your hands and you own it. With a 70% growth in only 5 years. Do you still doubt gold investment? Contact RJ Coin today. 031 202 4701 or visit them at 151 Stephen Lamini Road in Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange. Your passport to gold investment.
Welcome back. You are tuned into Salah Media. This is the Special Focus, and I am Zahid Jadwat. Of course, this is our final segment for the show this evening. And now we are going to be speaking to Keith Duarte, who is one of the organizers of a rally against police brutality and apartheid laws used by the ANC regime. So that's we are now joined by Mr. Keith Duarte on the line. Thank you so much for joining us, Keith.
Yes, thank you very much. Evening to the listeners, and salam alaikum to all our Muslim listeners.
Well, and indeed, it is a pleasure having you on the show this evening. Now, the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee is inviting all the political, what you call politically oppressed, economic exploited, and social degraded groups, organizations, and individuals to attend a rally that will take place in Eldorado Park on Sunday. That is the 6th of September 2020. So tell us, what exactly is this entire this rally all about? What is happening? Why is it happening? And where is it happening?
Well, the reason for the call for the rally is basically of a police brutality that has recently happened in Eldorado Park with a 16-year-old Down syndrome, Nathaniel Julius, that was brutally killed by one of the South African police officials, in whereby they have to protect our community, but they're doing arms and they're using exactly the same strategy of the apartheid government. So we are saying that we in Eldorado Park cannot fight this fight in isolation. We need all communities to come together and expose the police brutality in the other communities. And the rally is basically to give update to our community and the communities with regard to the court cases that these police officers appeared and the next court date. So it's basically an update of the procedures of the court cases and to solidify our fight with the corruption in the police force.
And so what exactly are you referring to when you speak about apartheid laws that are being used by the ANC regime?
Well, what we're saying is that the ANC has failed us. They absolutely failed us with regards to service delivery. The police force are not there to render a service to our community. They're basically there to do military operations within our community. We saw what happened also. We're now in lockdown 2, but during lockdown 3 and 4, the police basically targeted simple cases like selling cigarettes and leaving the drug dealers and the murderers astray. So meaning what we are saying is that they've wasted resources on that really didn't matter. So in that way they failed us. They failed us also in the way that if we look at us and if we look at our predominantly so-called colored areas, when you look at those predominantly so-called colored areas, you'll see that 80-90% of the police force or the appointment there at the police station is being politically appointed by the ANC.
And interestingly, you mentioned in one of the messages that has been going around is that all of your activists are charged by the state with incitement to public violence, and also charges of public violence, and also a charge in terms of the Infrastructure Act.
Correct. One of our activists, community leaders, Majita Ming, and we call it fabricated cases. It's fabricated by the South African police. Well, it's inciting violence, and it's public violence, and it's damaging to infrastructure. Now, this is fabricated cases and that's not the only activist that they've laid charges. They've laid charges to 4 other youth activists. Now, we're looking at this and we're saying if they lay a charge, it's criminal records against these young people. So we also have a mirror view of this case. 2 years ago, one of the community members in Westbury was slain by gangsters, and there was also eruption. I think you will remember there was also eruption on all the so-called colored areas, and there was an activist, Carol. They've also laid exactly the same fabricated charges against her, but this was basically just to pacify the community, and the community of Westbury. And if you think about it now, the community of Westbury has been quiet since they have intimidated this one activist. And this activist case is still ongoing. So this is a strategy to pacify and to scare communities.
Yeah. Okay. So speakers that are going to be at this protest are to include traditional leadership, representatives from labor, political parties, students and youth organizations, business, civil society, and the faith-based organizations. What kind of turnout are you expecting for this march?
Now, the Gauteng Housing Crisis Committee consists of plus minus 29 communities and growing. So we're expecting communities to come. We also invited unions, your unions like the National Union Mine Workers of South Africa. We've also invited political parties to attend. So what we're expecting, it's a normal crowd. It's a crowd, and it will be with stakeholders or organizations that will go back to their communities and implement what we have decided.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Keith Duarte, one of the organizers of a rally against police brutality and apartheid laws used by the ANC regime. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Yes. It's a pleasure.
And that's how we come to the end of the special focus for this week. My name is Zahid, and thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Just as you have tuned in to previous shows as well, cannot thank you enough for your support. But unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it for this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the technical team for your efforts as well. From myself, Zahid, and the team, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.